Hi, you're on the Reddit Confessions channel. Tonight's story begins the moment a wedding ring slid across a bar counter. Not during an argument, not in a courtroom, but in the middle of a crowded lounge where no one expected silence to fall. The ring wasn't lost. It wasn't stolen. It was placed there on purpose, by me, while my wife was outside with someone else. I had walked in only seconds earlier, the air still warm from where she'd been sitting at a booth with him, laughing over drinks I didn't buy. I didn't shout. I didn't demand an explanation. I just set the ring down, told the bartender, "Give this to her when she comes back," and left him blinking like he'd just been handed a live grenade. Outside, the night was loud. Music spilling from open doors, taxis honking, strangers talking over each other. But for me, it was like my ears had stopped working. I could see them in the alley beside the lounge, her head tilted back in laughter, his hand resting on her hip like it had been there for years. She noticed me first. Her laugh cracked mid-sound, and the color drained from her face. The man turned to look, his smile fading into something unreadable. I didn't stop walking. I brushed past them, felt her eyes following me, and I swear I could hear her heels scraping against the pavement as she took a step toward me, but I kept moving. By the time I reached my car, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the keys in the ignition. I sat there for a moment, staring at the steering wheel, my chest tight. I wanted to drive home, lock the door, and pretend none of this had happened. But I also knew that whatever was about to happen next would be worse than what I'd just seen, because I hadn't planned on leaving that ring forever. She must have hesitated outside, because I'd been sitting in my car for a few minutes when I saw her step back into the lounge. She wasn't laughing now. Even from the street, through the glass, I could see her scanning the room like she was expecting to spot me in a shadowed corner. The man followed her in, still close enough to brush against her arm. She went straight to the bar, her movements sharper than usual, and the bartender's expression told me he'd already guessed something wasn't right. He reached under the counter, pulled out the ring, and set it in front of her. For a moment, she just stared at it, frozen. Then she looked up at him, said something I couldn't hear, and her hand closed over it so quickly, it was like she thought someone might snatch it away. The man beside her leaned in, his lips moving fast, clearly asking what was going on. She didn't answer him right away. Instead, she glanced toward the entrance, almost as if she expected me to reappear. I couldn't see her face clearly from where I was parked, but I could read her body language. The way her shoulders tensed, the way she kept the ring in her fist instead of slipping it into her purse. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. And that fear wasn't because she'd been caught. It was because she didn't know what I was going to do next. She pulled her phone out then, scrolling frantically before pressing it to her ear. I knew she was calling me. My phone buzzed against my leg, the screen lighting up with her name. I let it ring. It stopped, then started again, and again. By the fourth call, I switched the phone off completely. From the corner of my eye, I saw her push the man's arm away and head toward the door. He called after her, confused, but she didn't turn back. I ducked down in my seat as she stepped onto the sidewalk, scanning the street. When she didn't spot me, she pulled her coat tight around herself and started walking fast in the opposite direction of our house. I didn't follow her this time. I just sat there, watching until she disappeared into the crowd, my chest tightening with the realization that tonight wasn't going to end with an argument or tears. Tonight was going to open a door I wasn't sure I could close again. By the time I drove away from that lounge, the streets felt like they were closing in on me. Every red light seemed longer than it should be. Every car that passed made me grip the steering wheel harder. I didn't go straight home. I couldn't. Instead, I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store and just sat there in the dark, watching people go in and out with their late-night snacks and bottles of wine, living lives that weren't about to implode. I kept picturing her walking out of the lounge without me, the ring in her hand, and wondered if she was already rewriting the story in her head, turning me into the unreasonable husband, the overreactor, the man who just doesn't understand. She's good at that. Always has been. I must have stayed there for an hour before I decided on my next move. I wasn't going home. Not yet. The thought of sitting in the same room with her, pretending like nothing happened, made my stomach twist. So instead, I drove to an old friend's place, someone she barely knew, someone whose name she wouldn't think to text it to in the morning. I told him I needed to crash for the night, no details, and he didn't ask questions. From his couch, I finally turned my phone back on. The screen lit up with missed calls, 16 of them. Text after text, all from her. At first, they were the usual. Where are you? We need to talk. Please answer. Then they shifted. Why are you doing this? You're making a scene. This isn't how adults handle things. And finally, the one that made my chest ache. If you cared about our marriage, you'd be home right now. No apology. No explanation. Just a demand to resume my role as the quiet, forgiving husband. I didn't reply. I placed the phone face down and stared at the ceiling, listening to the hum of my friend's fridge in the next room. I thought about how many times I'd let things slide before. Little lies, harmless, white lies, as she called them. A late night at work, here, an unreturned call there. I'd swallowed it all to keep the peace. And now, I realized that peace had been nothing more than a blanket she pulled over my head while she built another life in the dark. Around 2 a.m., the front door of my friend's place rattled. My pulse jumped. I heard footsteps in the hallway outside, slow but certain, and then a knock, 3 short raps. My friend was asleep in the other room, and the sound was too sharp, too deliberate, to be a neighbor. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The knock came again, followed by a voice I knew too well, low but cutting through the quiet. Lowell, I know you're in there. I stayed frozen on that couch, my back stiff, my palms damp, trying to convince myself I'd imagined her voice. But then the knock came again, harder this time, and the sound of her heels on the hallway floor echoed like small gunshots in my head. My friend stirred in his room, probably wondering who was at his door in the middle of the night, but I shot up and moved toward him before he could come out. I whispered through his half-open door that it was just a misunderstanding and that I'd handle it. I didn't tell him who it was, because if I did, I knew I'd see that same mix of pity and judgment I'd seen on too many faces lately. When I reached the door, I didn't open it right away. I pressed my ear to it and listened. She was breathing hard, not from running, but from that clipped, restrained anger she always got when things didn't go her way. Lowell, open the door. I don't want to talk out here, she said. Her tone wasn't pleading. It was commanding. Like this was just another one of her little messes I was supposed to clean up before anyone else noticed. I slid the deadbolt, but didn't turn the handle. What do you want? I asked through the wood. There was a pause, long enough for me to imagine her expression, the subtle narrowing of her eyes she used when she was trying to decide whether to charm or to threaten. Finally, she spoke. We can fix this, but you need to stop, whatever it is you're doing. You're making a fool of yourself. I laughed, a dry, ugly sound that startled even me. A fool of myself? You were the one with him. You were the one who took off your ring long before I handed it to a stranger. She didn't deny it. She didn't even flinch, at least not in her voice. That's not what this is about, she said, her tone sharpening. You think you understand, but you don't. If you keep pushing this, you're going to regret it more than you realize. That last line made something cold slide down my spine. She wasn't talking about our marriage. She wasn't talking about emotions. She was talking about something else entirely. Something I apparently wasn't supposed to know yet. I stepped back from the door, my mind spinning, my pulse loud in my ears. Go home, Celeste, I said finally. We'll talk tomorrow. But instead of the retreating sound of her heels, I heard her lean closer, her voice almost a whisper. Tomorrow might be too late. Then came the slow, deliberate click of her own footsteps leaving the hallway. I didn't move until I was sure she was gone. And even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever she'd meant by those words, it wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. Sleep didn't happen that night. I lay there on my friend's couch, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words over and over. Tomorrow might be too late. It was the way she'd said it. Not like a plea, but like she was already certain of something I wasn't aware of. My brain kept spinning through possibilities. Was she threatening to take something from me? To twist the story so I'd be the villain if this ended up in court? Or was there something else going on entirely? Something I had been too naive to even suspect? By the time the first thin light of morning slid through the blinds, I had made up my mind about one thing. I wasn't going to sit around and wait for her to decide what tomorrow would look like. I left my friend's place before he even woke up, driving with no real destination until I found myself in front of our house. The street was quiet. Her car wasn't there, but the blinds in the living room were drawn tightly shut. I stood in the driveway for a long time, debating whether to go in. My key still worked. When I stepped inside, the place felt staged. Too clean. The faint scent of her perfume hung in the air, but all the little signs of daily life were gone. The half-folded laundry, the coffee mugs by the sink, the pair of shoes she always left by the door. I headed straight to the bedroom and yanked open her side of the closet. Nearly half her clothes were gone. Drawers emptied. Jewelry boxes missing. My chest tightened as I pulled open the nightstand. The folder with our financial documents was gone, too. Panic started to creep in, but I forced myself to keep looking. That's when I found it. A plain envelope, left dead center on my pillow. My name was written on the front in her handwriting, the kind she used for birthday cards and grocery lists. Inside, there was a single sheet of paper. No greeting, no explanation, just one sentence. You'll understand soon. My first instinct was to call her, but the second I reached for my phone, I stopped. If she had stripped the house of her things and left a cryptic note, calling her wouldn't get me answers. It would give her control over what I heard. So instead, I opened my laptop and started digging. I went through bank accounts first. Nothing had been drained, but 2 new transfers had appeared overnight, small amounts, but to accounts I didn't recognize. Then I checked our shared email account. Buried in the spam folder were 3 flight confirmations, all under her name, booked for the next day to a city we had never visited together. The passenger list? Just her and one other person. And here's the part that made my stomach drop. The other name wasn't the man I'd seen her with at the lounge. It was someone I hadn't thought about in years, someone I thought was gone from our lives for good. The name on that ticket hit me like a gut punch, Aaron Mallory. A name I hadn't heard in over a decade, but one that had once been tangled deep into our lives. Back then, Aaron wasn't just a passing acquaintance. He was Celeste's closest friend from college, the kind of guy she swore was like a brother. I never liked him. There was something about his easy charm, the way he inserted himself into every conversation and always had a little too much interest in our relationship, that set my teeth on edge. We lost contact with him after a huge fallout. Something about money he owed, rumors he'd started, and one ugly night where I caught him in our kitchen at 2 a.m., whispering to Celeste about the kind of life she could have without me. After that, he vanished from our orbit completely, or so I thought. Seeing his name on a flight confirmation booked with my wife's told me 2 things. Not only had they reconnected behind my back, but whatever they were planning was big enough to require secrecy, a getaway, and possibly a permanent move. That tomorrow might be too late, line suddenly took on a different weight. This wasn't just about me finding out she'd been cheating. This felt like the opening scene of a plan that was already in motion. I started piecing the timeline together in my head. Every late-night text she claimed was from work, every weekend trip to see family, every unexplained expense she brushed off. My stomach twisted as I realized Aaron had probably been in the picture far longer than I'd imagined. It wasn't just an affair, it was an infiltration. He'd been the quiet shadow slipping back into her life, while I was too busy trying to be the kind of husband who didn't snoop. I opened the envelope again, reading that single sentence until the words blurred. You'll understand soon. That wasn't a goodbye. That was a statement of inevitability, almost a promise. I didn't want to admit it, but a small, terrified part of me wondered if this wasn't just about leaving me. What if she and Aaron were planning something that could ruin me before I even had a chance to defend myself? I printed the flight confirmations and stuffed them in my jacket pocket. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I dug out the old shoebox from the top of the closet where I kept my private files, the things I'd hoped I'd never need. Inside were bank statements from the years when Aaron was still around, screenshots of suspicious messages, and a copy of an email I'd never confronted Celeste about. One she'd sent him in the middle of the night, just months before he disappeared, with the subject line, "When the time is right." That phrase and her note were now clawing at the back of my mind. I didn't know what the time was supposed to bring, but I had the growing sense that I was already standing in the middle of it. By late afternoon, I had gone from shaken to restless. Sitting in that empty house with the blinds drawn felt like being locked inside a pressure cooker. Every creak in the walls made me think she had come back. Every car slowing on the street made my pulse spike. I wasn't going to wait for her to make the next move. I needed to see her face, to hear whatever she thought she could say that would make any of this make sense. I tracked her phone through the old shared account she didn't know I still had access to. The signal was pinging from a boutique hotel downtown, not far from the lounge where I'd last seen her. My gut told me she wouldn't be alone. I grabbed the printed flight confirmations, stuffed them into an envelope, and headed out. The lobby was quiet, the kind of quiet you only get in expensive places where people are paying for privacy. I asked the desk clerk if Celeste was checked in. He looked like he was about to tell me he couldn't share that information until I slid the envelope across the counter and said, "I just need to give her this. It's urgent." He glanced at the name on the reservations list, hesitated, and then picked up the phone. Seconds later, he told me she was in the lounge upstairs. When I found her, she wasn't with Aaron. She was sitting in a corner booth with a leather bag on the seat beside her, sipping something clear and cold. She didn't flinch when she saw me. Instead, she set her glass down, leaned back, and gave me a look I'd never seen from her before. Not angry, not guilty, but almost amused. "You've been busy," she said, her eyes flicking to the envelope in my hand. I slid it across the table, not sitting down. 3 tickets booked. Yours and Aaron's I expected. But the third one? Her expression shifted just slightly, the corner of her mouth twitching. She opened the envelope, glanced at the papers, and then closed it again without reading. "You're late," she said flatly. The words hit me like a slap. "Late for what?" I asked. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small key, the kind that didn't look like it belonged to a house or a car. She set it between us. "This was supposed to be simple, Lowell. But you had to turn it into whatever this is." I stared at the key, feeling a weight in my chest. "What's it for?" She gave a short, humorless laugh. "You'll find out. But when you do, remember, you could have walked away tonight, and instead, you stayed." She picked up her bag and the key, slid out of the booth, and walked toward the elevators without looking back. I stayed rooted to the spot, my mind spinning, realizing that whatever she and Aaron were planning, I wasn't just a bystander anymore. I was now officially inside the game, and I had no idea what the rules were. I didn't chase her to the elevator. Something in me told me that whatever she thought she had over me, it was slipping. I sat there for a while, my fingers tracing the edge of the envelope I'd given her, thinking about the years I'd spent swallowing my doubts just to keep the peace. But now, there was no peace to preserve. There was only the truth, and I finally had enough of it in my hands to turn this whole thing around. When I got home, I didn't stew in the dark or pace the floor. I went straight to my desk and opened every file I'd ever saved that could connect Celeste and Aaron. Old messages, bank records, the email with the phrase "when the time is right." I compiled it into one neat package, along with the flight confirmations and a short letter to my attorney. I didn't write it out of spite. I wrote it to make sure she couldn't twist this into her version of events, where I was the unstable husband chasing shadows. The next morning, I sent the package off and then drove to my sister's house 2 towns over. She and I had drifted apart over the years, mostly because Celeste didn't like how outspoken she was. But when I showed up on her porch, duffel bag in hand, she hugged me like not a single day had passed. We spent hours talking, laughing about old memories, and for the first time in months, I felt my chest loosen. A few days later, I got a call from my attorney. His voice was almost smug. She tried to make a move before she left. "But we caught it in time. Your accounts are secure. You're going to be fine." I hung up and just sat there in my sister's kitchen, the sunlight warming my face. Fine. I was going to be fine. Celeste and Aaron? They still took that flight. But now it didn't matter. They left with nothing of mine. Not the money, not the house, and most importantly, not the power to make me feel small anymore. I realized that tomorrow might be too late had only been true for her. For me, tomorrow was exactly when things started to get better. So here I am, telling you this not as the man who sat in a car shaking outside a lounge, but as the man who walked away with his life intact, lighter, freer, and finally done letting someone else write my story. What about you? Have you ever had a moment where you thought the end of something was the worst thing that could happen, only to realize it was the best? Share your stories in the comments. I read every single one. And don't forget, you're watching Reddit Confessions, where the truth is always more surprising than fiction.